Greetings everyone, welcome to APchemistrycourse course. In today's lesson I'm going to talk about Boyle's law. Alright, so Boyle's law was discovered or was published in 1662 by Robert Boyles. Alright, so the name was coined by his family name, so it was called Boyle's law. Alright, so in Boyle's law, what does it talk about? What does the law talk about? Well, it simply talks about gases, but it has one certain rule, and we're going to talk about the other rules in the gases. Alright, so one of them is the Boyle's law. So what does it talk about? So imagine we have two pistons. Alright, we have piston the blue and piston piston red. So we have piston B, piston R. We can see in piston R that the molecules and atoms of air are just moving freely and have big space to move around in. And you can see there's an arrow that says P for pressure going down and V for volume going up. What does that mean? Well, imagine you have a bottle. Alright, so we have a bottle and we just simply blow a little bit of air inside it. What will happen is that the air molecules are inside, but there is no pressure. There is no pressure. So you can see it here, they're moving freely. But now they have high volume because you can see there's big space, empty space in here. And there's little pressure because he filled it up with air and the molecules and the atoms of air are just moving freely around. So there's no pressure. But what about if he starts compressing the bottle, he starts spinning it? You know, when you want to compress a bottle, you start spinning it like this so that it locks from the middle and turns to this shape. It has that shape that looks like this. So the bottle looks like this now. What happens here is that he made the space smaller. He decreased the volume. So from high volume, now it's a low volume. So we have low volume now. But what happens here is that pressure increases as you close in distance. So we can see that we have here an inverse relationship. What does that mean? It means if we have two pistons, or the same piston, let's say. Alright, so we have here piston A, and then it turns to piston B, let's say. What happens is that in piston A, we filled it up with air. And we can see that there's amount of volume, there's a high amount of volume. And there's space between the atoms and molecules of air. And there's no pressure because they're not closing into each other and there is plenty of space they can move around freely. But as soon as you push in the piston inside, what happens is that you're tightening up the atoms and molecules of air and there's little volume. So what happens is that when you have little volume, the atoms are moving so fast and there's little distance and it's hitting the container walls so fast that there's pressure that it can pop. So pressure increases as volume decreases and pressure decreases as volume increases. So that's an inverse relationship. Now when we talk about Boyle's law, what does it talk all about? It's simply this formula. P1 times V1 equals P2 times V2. Alright, so what does that mean? It means the change in that side will equal the change in that side of either pressure or volume. So what happens here is that if we take a container and we want to know the pressure, what happens is that we plug in the data from before pressurizing the container, and after it we don't know the pressure that is inside. What happens is that we take the old data, we plug it in P1. Always P1 is the first pressure or the first pressure that we started with. P2 is the second pressure or the second pressure that we're present with. So what happens then is that in P1 that we know P1, for example, let's say it's 24 pascals, for example, and the P2 we don't know it, and we know the volume of V1, but what about volume 2? We can see that the second volume, we know, for example, the data. What happens is that we plug in the data here, we plug in the data here and here, and we're left with P. So what happens here is that we can do the math and we can get the pressure. Alright, so it's just simply using P1 times V1 equals P2 times V2. Alright, So this is the formula, and we said that it's an inverse relationship. What does that mean? It means that as pressure increases, volume always should decrease, and as volume decreases, pressure increases. And the inverse of it is also correct, which is as pressure decreases, volume increases, and as volume increases, pressure decreases. Alright, so it's as simple as it is. This is only an introduction to the lesson. And in the part 2 video, we're going to do a lot of formulas and equations. Equations to solve. And it's going to be pretty fun. Alright, so this is all about the Boyle's law. This is all about the law of Boyle's, which is simply P1 times V1 equals P2 times V2. So that means that as pressure increases, volume decreases, and as volume increases, pressure decreases. This is all about the law of Boyle's, and it was discovered in 1662 by Robert Boyle. Alright, so this is all about our lesson for today, and I hope it was useful.